So, about every day, I go out on a bike ride around the Bayside Trail, right along the bay here in San Francisco. I ride my bike along the trail. It's a beautiful day, usually, if the wind isn't going 150 miles an hour. And what I, of course, see on one side, right next to the bay, are what are known as our levees. Now, our levees are important because they are big rock walls that would prevent the ocean from lapping up upon the shore and hurting the communities that are there. But I was talking to one of the levee workers, and it does seem like the levees are always getting worked on. I said to him, well, isn't it good that we have the levees? Because if there was like an earthquake or like a tsunami or a big wave, or if there was rising global temperatures, which would increase the ocean size, that these levees would stop the water. This levee worker said, well, actually, they will stop the water for a little while, but they are a temporary fix. In other words, if a lot of water were to come up upon the shore here in the peninsula, the levees would only hold it for a while. And then I'll never forget what his next phrase was. It is that levees are boundaries that afford a person or a community to buy next steps, to buy time for next steps. So I've been thinking about that in terms of moms and saying no, and I think the best definition I have for the word no for moms is it is a boundary for you to buy time in order to figure out your next steps. Now, let me talk about the oceans that come upon moms. And again, if you are a mom today, or if you know a mom, or if you have a mom, you can put a heart button up here if any of the things I'm talking about resonate. But there are so many oceans which wash upon moms every single day. And so there's at least three groups of things that are impediments or they are challenges for moms to deal with every single day. And here's just one list. They are the demands that your kids place on you. Now, kids are always asking for things. That's the nature of kids. But I wanted to share with you a list of things that my wife Star is asked on a daily basis by our three wonderful kids. This is just one day. Here's the list of the ocean that washes over moms. Can we have a sleepover this weekend? Number one. Can I stay up later tonight? Number two. Can I go over to Claire's house after school? Number three. Can I get a new outfit? Number four. Can I get a horse? I don't know which daughter that comes from. Can I go to Charlie's birthday party? Can I get help with my homework? Can I have something else to eat for dinner? And here was my latest and my favorite one lately. This is totally true. Can we go in the basement and invent a cure for the COVID crisis out of slime? I am not kidding about that one. So that's just the demands that kids put on parents. And again, that is timeless. If you're a grandma or a grandpa or whatever generation you are, you remember that your kids were demanding. That's just one ocean. And most moms can handle the demands of the oceans that come upon them from their kids. But that's just one ocean. The second ocean that washes up on moms every day, and this is a list of things that my wife was asked to do just this last week. These are the demands the community places on you, the demands that the larger community places on you. Here is just one list of things that Star has had to respond to. Can you sign up for the Parents Advisory Board? Can you bring snacks to softball? Can you be the Brownie Club hike captain? Can you fill out this paperwork for this activity? Can you sign up for another Zoom registration? And here was my favorite. One of our schools, this was a couple years ago, said, can you please send your kid to school tomorrow in the color fluorescent green? Now, I was alive in the 1980s when fluorescent green was the thing, but try to find fluorescent green anywhere, any place, except for Amazon and a 24-hour delivery to get your kid to wear fluorescent green so they're not the only ones not wearing fluorescent green. My favorite example of this was a great commercial from the California Walnuts Board. You got to see this. Google this right after the message. It's a dad who is picking up his kid, and the kid is coming off of the bus wearing the craziest pajama outfit. And the dad, with a degree of pride, says, "Hey, bud," as he hands his kid a bag of walnuts and said, "How was pajama day?" And the kid scowls back at his dad and says, "Dad, it was picture day." What parent cannot relate to that? The demands that parents get from the community is insane. And by the way, I have lived in 8 different U.S. states in my life and 15 different U.S. cities. And I've never lived in a place that places more demands on moms than the Bay Area. And I just want to add one more to that. I know that one of the demands that is asked of moms comes from churches like this one. And what I want to say to you today, because moms basically keep this place going, is that without you, but I can also tell you that if there is ever a demand that the church is placing on you that is a demand that you cannot do, I want to give you permission to just not do it. Okay. The third ocean that washes on all moms, especially in this area, are demands in the workplace. Again, these are not just like ordinary, you go into work, you check out your brain at 9, you check it out again at 5 p.m. No, these are full-on, super demanding jobs that moms in this area have. And so these 3 oceans wash up on moms every single day. Now, I know that you know what I'm about to tell you. You can exactly see where this message is going, is I'm about to give you permission to say no, and the answer is yes. But I want to say 2 things about that before we look at our text today. The first is this: I want you to say no without feeling guilty about saying no. I talked to a friend of mine who works full-time, has 3 kids, and she said, I can say no. It's just the guilt that I feel afterwards when I do. So on behalf of my profession, I want to give you permission to say no without guilt. But the second thing I just want to say is when I ask you to say no, I'm not doing it for the benefit of your kids, or for the benefit of your community, or for the benefit of your work. But I want to say that for you. Because as we saw earlier, like the levees, no is a boundary that buys you space for your next steps. So let's take a look at our text. It is a woman named Esther, who is one of the great heroines of the Bible. Esther was an orphan, a Jewish orphan who was a part of the diaspora when the Jews were enslaved. She had no family except for a cousin named Mordecai, who sometimes gave her good advice and sometimes didn't. But she had nobody. And so from the beginning of her life, she had ocean upon ocean washing over her whole being. Until one day, the Persian king by the name of King Ahasuerus invites Esther to come in and be a part of the harem of the Persian court. Now you may say, well, that doesn't sound like a good job to be a harem in the harem of a king of Persia. But if you had nothing else in your life, that would be a good job option. So Esther rises up in the court until she becomes queen of Persia under King Ahasuerus. Now, once she becomes queen, that is when the real oceans wash over Esther. An ocean of a genocide. That is, that the Persians wanted, particularly a person by the name of Haman, wanted to eradicate, annihilate, to destroy all Jewish people, like something that you might see out of the Holocaust. And that is when Mordecai comes to his cousin Esther and says, Esther, will you stand up for the Jewish people? A huge ocean washes over Esther. And this is where she had to decide what she would risk for something greater. In other words, if she went to the king and said that he must save the Jewish people, she herself could be killed, her whole family could be killed, her cousin could be killed. And that's where we pick up our text. And so Mordecai is coming into her with a list of demands. You must do this, Esther. But that's where Esther, to use the theme of the morning, builds a boundary that gives her space to determine her next steps. So let's take a look at our text. Again, we're looking at the book of Esther, and if you've never read that book, I encourage you to do so. It's only 10 short chapters, but here is what she says to Mordecai. Now, there isn't a hard no in the text. There's actually a go. But you can read the word no in her here. And then she says this. She says to Mordecai, go and gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. So this is the first thing that a no can do for a person. It can give you space to develop spiritual support. That's what Esther's doing. She's developing a whole group of supporters. You have a big decision in your life, and they come at you and they say, I need you to make a decision. Your no can give you time to build spiritual supporters. But that's not the only thing she says. She says, go and gather people to continue to fast and pray. She said, do not eat or drink for 3 days, or day or night. Now, when Esther is saying this, she's also talking about the second thing that a no can do. It can buy you time. Time. Sometimes that's all you need to make a decision. Whether it's a small one, like whether your kid will do a sleepover, or a big one, like you're going to take a new job, you need time. She said, we're going to wait 3 days. And then finally she says this, I and all of my attendants will fast as you do. And fasting is just another word for prayer in the Bible. So she said, I am going to say no to you in order to get spiritual support, in order to pray, and in order to have time. So Esther does that, and when she says this, she says, when it is done, I will go to the king, and even though it is against the law for a Jewish slave to speak up to a Persian king, I will stand up for the Jewish people. And she says, if I perish, I will perish. We know from history that Esther does stand up for the Jewish people, and she saves an entire people group. But again, how did that happen? It happened with the beginning of her saying no, so that she could have a boundary to have space for the next steps in her life. So this is a tough concept, I realize. This is complicated to think about no as a self-preserving technique. Here's another illustration of this. People tell me all the time that I need to watch this movie or that on Netflix or Amazon Prime. But honestly, most of the movies that I see are so dark and dreary and yucky that I can't watch more than like half of an episode before I push stop. But the one genre of shows that I have been watching are nature shows. And I always find there's something comforting in watching like animals in nature. So there was one this last week from the Canadian Rockies, and it featured a little mama grizzly bear and her little 4 or 5 cubs. And so it showed these little cubs playing around. They were sort of wrestling with each other. They were getting into little bear cub trouble. And then they would sometimes jump up on the mom, and they would kind of like roughhouse. But then what would happen is the mama would do kind of a little paw, like pushing away one of these little cubs. Or she'd give it a little nip. And the narrator of the show would say, and I love narrators of nature shows, maybe that's why I like them, the mother cub is not hurting the baby cub, but is showing the baby cub who the mama is. And it gives her opportunities to decide what to do next. That is exactly what I'm talking about today. It gives you a boundary that can buy you space for the next steps. All right, so here's my 2 ideas I want to share with you before I sit down. Number 1, saying no is one of the best things you can do for your soul. Saying no is one of the best things you can do for building your soul. So I don't have the time to go into like the tomes and reams of educational background and theology and philosophy about saying no and its power over our souls. But here's just a couple, if you want to Google these, look up the power of negation. And there's a whole stream of thought which comes from Piaget, Jean Piaget, the great Swiss developmental psychologist, which says that a human soul can only begin to grow after it says no. And he cites like the terrible twos. We know 2-year-olds love to say no. It's hopefully 3 and 4-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 20-year-olds who can say yes. Here's a book I want to share with you. It is written by a friend of mine named Greg Kusana, who is a pastor up in Chico, and he also used to be a theologian in residence here at burlpres. And he's written a book called Say Yes to No, the power of no to create the best in work, life, and love. And this book is in our library. But one of the things that Greg talks about is he cites the great author Anne Lamott, who said that saying no is also good enough for the best-selling novelist Anne Lamott, who continually says this: every time you say yes, when you mean no, you abandon yourself a little. And eventually, too much sand is going to leak out of your burlap sacks, and you're going to be operating out of a place of emptiness and deprivation and resentment. Whereas, she says, when you say no, when you mean no, you create a little glade around you in which you can get the nourishment that you need. Again, there's a lot more good stuff in this book. So no is one of the best things you can do for your souls. Steve Jobs said this about saying no: it's only in saying no that you can concentrate on the things that are really important. And Sandra Bullock, one of my favorite actresses, she said this about no. She said, "My goal now is to remember every place that I've ever been. Only do the things that I really love and not say yes when I don't mean it." The gospel of Sandra Bullock. So, moms, one of the best things you can do for your souls is to say no. Here's a fun example, by the way. You don't have to come down with like a hard, angry no. Here was a mom who wanted to say no to the kids about driving too fast. She has an image of a speedometer, and right after the 65 miles per hour, she writes the word no. That's hilarious. So it's one of the best things you can do for your soul. And so what I want to ask you are 2 questions before I sit down. Number 1, what are you going to say no to this week? Now, here's some opportunities. Here's some examples of things you may say no to. Maybe you say no to the extra activity with your kids. Maybe you say no to your boss. Maybe you say no to going to another kid's party. Maybe you say no to pajama day at school. Maybe the thing you need to say no to is perfection. Maybe it's saying no to a perfectly clean house or gourmet meal. Maybe it's saying no to helping your kid get all of their homework done. Who cares? It's almost the end of the school year. And maybe it's saying no to me or to this church if we've put too much on you. So what are you going to say no to? And I want to give you 100% permission to say no. And if anyone says, well, who gave you permission to say no? Say, Pastor Graham told me to say no. But finally, here's my biggest question for you. What will you say yes to this week? Because you were able to say no to something else. What will you say yes to? Maybe you'll have a chance to say yes to yourself for the first time in a long time. Maybe you'll have a chance to say yes to God, yes to space, yes to oxygen, yes to being some person that God created that has been hiding in there and has wanted to come out for the longest time, but you've been doing so many little things that you've never said no to. I'll just end with this little personal confession. You know, I have disappointed way more people in my life by saying yes to the things I shouldn't have than to saying no to the things I should. May God be with you this week as you say no so that you can say yes. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.